All right, shall we start? Right, my name is Margarita Rivera. I'm a soil health planner in Tremont, and I'm here to introduce you Jared Sorensen. Jared and Selena have been married for 25 years and are the parents of 9 children. Last year, they welcomed their first granddaughter into their family. They are third generation ranchers managing the operation Jared's grandfather and father built in Secret Pass in Clover Valley, Nevada. Jared is a long learner and had applied and teaches principles of holistic management, soil, agriculture, generation and biodynamics. Jared has mentors many young people seeking to get a start in agriculture. Some have gone up to purchase, lease, and manage their own ranches. The Sorensens raise and market grass-fed beef, teach on-site and virtually classes, and offer internships on the ranch. That's pretty awesome. And here he is.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you for that introduction. I sure appreciate that. And welcome everybody to the class here today. Just kind of want to get a feel for who the audience is, and I was able to introduce myself to a few of you at the beginning, but just curious, how many of you currently own cattle or managing cattle right now? Okay, and yeah, you're in the right place. For those of you who don't own cattle, the principles apply. One of the 5 soil health principles is integrate livestock, but that can be done in different ways. I'm going to talk about the cow because I'm a cow man. My family grew up running sheep, actually started here in southern Utah and moved to Elko County long before I was born. 1940s, I guess, is when they moved from southern Utah to Elko. So we're cow-calf operators. This is my family. Nine kids. We've got one boy that was on a mission in that picture, and we've got a grandchild. So feel pretty blessed. I'll probably go ahead and roam around a little bit because I don't like being tethered. Does it work if I move? I don't know which camera I'm in, or it probably doesn't even matter. They're just looking at the slides anyway, right? Okay. So we'll just go through here. My wife and I have been married for 25, almost 26 years, and we try to run a family operation in which the kids get to participate as much as they would like to, sometimes more than they would like to. But they have good benefits. If they work, they eat, and it's good. But we really want to make sure that this is a generational operation whereby we can, I'm the 3rd generation, and I don't want it to die on my clock. So how do you do that? There's some challenges that are facing agriculture today. Can we all agree on that? It seems like water is a big issue that everybody talks about right now, right? Lack thereof. Sometime I'd like to deal with a flood and maybe have to talk about how we mitigate that high rainfall event. But that's not going to be in the topic today. So just to start off, is it Margarita mentioned in the beginning, we do teach on-site classes. We're working with the Savory hub out of California. So we've got some classes that we'll be teaching. This one in particular, we're going to be going over today, the planned grazing and some of the principles that you would learn if you were to come in that 3-day class. So this is a super fast crash course in managed grazing. If you want to learn more, come to that class. If you want to take all of those classes together, do that. We do some internships and things also. And this is the website address, jaredysorensen.com/ranch. That will take you to the sign-up page. If I did everything right, I'm not a website designer, but I did it for the first time. So we'll see if it all works. And so that'll take you to the pages to be able to sign up. We invite you guys to come. It's going to be on site. It's going to be classroom learning, but it's also going to be lots of field work, digging, looking at soil, looking at grass, looking at animals, looking at plants, looking at all the things that we do, and answering a lot of questions. And so those classes will be very interactive. Here, we're just going to have to be more, especially because we're on video. This is kind of more of a canned presentation, but out there that can be pretty dynamic and super, lot of fun. If you fall asleep in one of the classes there, it's because I don't know, maybe you drank too much the night before or something, who knows, but, because we do try to keep it pretty fun. Okay, so that's about me. Who knows this guy? How many of you recognize him? Okay, this is Alan Savory. If you don't know him, get to know him, look up his TED Talk. That is really, I mean, Alan Savory's been around for a long time, but when he put out this TED Talk, then his name became kind of a household word when it comes to soil regeneration. Okay, so these are the 4 principles, or the 4 key insights according to Alan Savory. Alan Savory was a military man in South Africa, became a wildlife biologist. He saw that there was something happening in South Africa named desertification, meaning that more land was losing productivity and was becoming desert. And at first he thought, it's the elephant's fault. It's these migratory animals. There's too many of them. And he talks a little bit about this in some of his literature, what he did to mitigate that, remove those animals from the landscape, and things got worse. They accelerated. So he thought, oh no, what do we do now? Let's figure out what we need to do. And so he came up with these insights kind of in response to a lot of observation. He wasn't the first one to come up with planned grazing. Andre Voisin had written a book called Grass Productivity years before. And it was kind of a combination of observation, reading, trial, and a lot of error that he came up with a system that works for management on large-scale ranches. So all these things that we're going to talk about on a larger scale. So to kind of give some context, everybody wants to know where you're from, how bad the drought is, how many cows you run, and how many acres do you run them on, okay? So we are from northeastern Nevada. It's kind of the top corner of Nevada. We operate in Ruby Valley and Clover Valley. So kind of along the Ruby Mountain Range, East Humboldt Ranges. We operate in two locations. Total combined acreage is about 24,000 that we manage. We own about half of it, we lease half of it. Plus we have a couple small Forest Service allotments. We are custom grazers. For those of you who aren't familiar with that terminology, that means that we bring cattle in and we take care of them for other people for a season, and then they go home. So it allows for a lot of adaptability in our stocking rate based on the carrying capacity, and those are 2 different terms that we might talk about here. We'll clarify what that means. So, any other questions about where I am, the drought's bad, but not as bad as here. That's the other question, okay? So it's all relative, right? Where we are in a drought, but we grew grass last year, so some folks from the Arizona Strip, the Atkins and the Heatons sent us cows, so obviously it's not as bad there as it is here. So, okay. We're going to talk about these 4 principles and what they mean in our management, kind of our day-to-day management. You've probably heard about here in this conference the difference between reductionist science and holistic science. Reductionist is whereby you say, you're looking at one piece of a bigger system and you're focusing on that one piece. Holism is you're saying, yes, this car has a steering wheel, but the steering wheel has no function without the car. Nor does the car function very well without the steering wheel, right? How many of you would get in a car with an Uber driver without a steering wheel? Okay, so you kind of get it. It's a holistic system, but yet in science and in kind of the way that we study in modern education, we like to break things apart. Why? Because it's easier to understand it that way. I make steering wheels, and therefore I can be really good at making steering wheels. I raise corn. I can be really good at raising corn. I'm a cow-calf guy. I can do that. But we have to look at the bigger picture and how all those things fit together. That is holism. Okay, so holistic or holism. And the predator-prey relationship. One of the things when Alan Savory started to study is he realized that these big migratory herds of animals the reason that they migrated was not only because they ran out of feed, but also there was predation that always kept them on the move. Okay? So in nature, that is a check and a balance, a natural system that nature uses to be able to limit grazing. So it was oftentimes when these huge herds of wildebeest or on the prairies, the buffalo, they would come through and they would decimate the ground, but then they wouldn't come back for maybe a year or 18 months whenever they came back to that area. So it had lots of time for recovery. This is an issue that we're having in northeastern Nevada. This is an animal that doesn't have a predator, and it's not managed. So my family owned a 5,000 acre BLM allotment that became overrun with wild horses. And it came to the point that it was no longer profitable to run it, and even no longer feasible to run it, and so we sold it. So if without management, without predation, then overgrazing occurs and degradation occurs, and who knows how long it will take to be able to regenerate soils after that kind of degradation, especially in a fragile environment that we live in. Okay, so number 3, right? Am I on the right? Brittleness. Okay. I always try to think of simpler ways to explain complex issues. And so if you guys can come up with a simpler way to explain brittleness, shoot it out there. Okay, so brittleness is not a function of rainfall. First of all, let's clarify that, because you can have a brittle environment that can be a high rainfall environment. It's more a function of humidity over time throughout the year. So there can be lower rainfall areas that has higher humidity that is less brittle. So on the one side, we have a brittleness of 1, which would be like a rainforest environment, very tropical, very humid year-round. On the other side, we've got more of a desert, where it is a high brittleness of a 10. So the big difference here is the way that things decompose. How do things decompose in a rainforest? Quick. So if you leave a 2x4 out in the rainforest over the winter and you come back in a year, what's it going to look like? Maybe you won't find it, right? Or it's going to have a lot of fungus, it's going to have a lot of moss on it, it's going to be well into that decomposition process. If you leave a 2x4 out in the middle of the desert, what's it going to look like in a year? Might be a little sun bleached, might be a little dirty from the wind blowing on it, but largely it's still going to be the same piece. So the way that things break down in a tropical or a low brittleness scale environment is they break down biologically, because there's a lot of biology. There's a lot of growth, there's a lot of deadfall, things are cycling really fast, really fast. Over on this side, the things tend to break down with the sun and through oxidation. So if you take a bunch grass plant and you put it in the desert and you don't graze it and snow doesn't fall on it, it will oxidize. It'll turn, I don't know if you guys have noticed that, it'll turn brown or kind of that gray color. And so that's the way that it decomposes. So that's kind of the bigger difference. So these principles are key to be able to understanding when we come up with a management plan, because the way we manage something in a high brittleness scale environment is going to be different than we do in a low brittleness scale environment. So this is just an example of probably a higher end on the brittleness scale. It's right next to a riparian area on our ranch. But if you turn, and this isn't exact, I didn't have a good picture looking out the different direction, but this is basically what it almost looks like going, 90 degrees. So if I'm facing the aspen trees over here and the willows, if I turn around and I walk 100 feet, this is what I'm going to see, okay? So brittleness also can be different on your ranch. An irrigated meadow will be less brittle than a sagebrush area. Okay, any questions on the brittleness? Don't want to belabor it, but I think it's really important that you at least have a conceptual understanding. Okay, and then the fourth principle is timing. And that was the one thing that Alan Savory, it took him a while to figure it out. Like he watched and he observed and he saw the herds come through. And when he started mimicking that with the ranchers who were crazy enough to listen to him, they failed miserably because they didn't have this piece in place. They didn't understand that timing, not only how long the cattle were there, but most importantly, how quickly they came back when we were talking about timing. So there's two functions, how long they're there, and most importantly, when they return. And so if we don't have the timing figured out, we can come back too quick, or we can stay too long. So who has a good definition for overgrazing? Anybody want to be brave and shout it out, and I'll repeat it into the microphone for everybody in YouTube land? Yes, sir. Okay. Grazing a plant, regrazing, did you say, a plant before it's fully recovered. How many of you would agree with that definition? Anybody have another definition? What about the definition of there's too many cows? Is that overgrazing? Trick question. Depends on, okay, so too many cows, if we don't have the time figure in that, that could lead to overgrazing. But too many cows in and of itself is not the issue. But what do some groups tell ranchers? The way to stop overgrazing is to destock or get rid of the cows entirely, right? And is that the answer? In a tropical environment, succession can continue without livestock. In a brittle environment, it's very important to integrate livestock, because otherwise, remember, that stuff is going to have to break down, it's going to break down chemically and through the sun, through oxidation, versus biologically. The cow's so wonderful because it eats that lignified grass, even if it has very little feed value. It adds some microbes to it, it breaks it down, and then it comes out the back end and something that the soil can use. Yes, sir.
No, and it's interesting now to talk to some of the BLM people because they've lost the diversity that they had when it was stocked. It's becoming now they're looking to undo what they did.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so we see that in national parks and state parks and other areas where they saw that, again, Alan Savory's first observation, it's too many animals, let's get the animals off, and things went backwards. Okay, so this is a lot of data, and I apologize for this. Maybe I should tell more stories, but so the second piece of data, so we have our 4 key insights, and we overlay that over the 6 principles. You guys have probably seen them a dozen times here this week. If you don't have them memorized, that's okay, but you gotta have them memorized before you go to the next class. Margarita's going to be at the door. She's going to be making sure that you know. At least have a basic understanding of what these mean, right? So these are the 6 soil health principles. NRCS teaches them. Gabe Brown teaches them. And I really appreciate that they added the first one, and that was context. And so this is important because integrating livestock does not always work in a cropping or a vegetable production situation, right? And so we have to be creative about how we incorporate. And if we don't get all of them, yes, there might be a little bit of weakness in our system, but if we're nailing the other ones and we're weak on one of them, I think we can compensate it. Nature's very forgiving. All we have to do is try our best, learn, adapt, and do better next year than this year. And we're gonna make success, okay? We're gonna be successful. Okay, so cows are always bad, right? Not to pick on the feedlot industry, but it's not the cow, it's the how. It's not the cow, it's the how. That's the, I don't know, whatever the meme is that might be out there, right? So, degenerative, maybe, right? High input costs, haul the feed in, haul the manure out, haul the cows in, sometimes some disease, overcrowding. I wouldn't want to live in that situation. If I had the choice, maybe I might choose that one. I think this is regenerative. It's more of a closed loop system. The feed is produced on site, the manure goes right back out, it feeds the soil. Cows are growing right there. So this is one of our pastures in kind of peak growing season. You can see things have already gone to seed. We're a little bit late, and we're going to talk about that. Must have a dead battery here. Okay, so let's talk about, first of all, this grass growth curve. Maybe if you're not familiar with this, just kind of try to digest it a little bit. Some people call it phase 1 is the diaper phase, phase 2 is the adolescent phase, phase 3 is the geriatric phase. Okay, so we all kind of fit into that somewhere in this group, and grass always is going to fit into that somewhere. So diaper phase, or phase 1, is, when it's cool, when it's really starting to just green up and start to grow. It's just about ready to really pop. Adolescent phase is that teenager that never gets full. It just eat. It's just going to grow in mass, grow in muscle. And then adolescent phase is more of that the geriatric phase is kind of when it just tapers off. It's going to maintain, right? It's got all its growth, and then it goes into, instead of growing into growth, it goes into seed production. And understanding this is super important when it comes to grazing, about how we graze. Because if we look at the protein of the grass, this isn't exact, but it goes something like this. When it's really green, our protein is super high, right? Anybody stood behind a cow that's on really green grass and she coughs? That kind of goes pretty fast. The passage rate on that is really fast, from grass to grass out the back end. Okay, so that's super green grass. But then as it starts to grow into phase 2, the protein comes down to very little protein when that gets really mature. You follow me here? Okay. And so we look at the next slide and we overlay that with lignin, and lignin is those carbohydrates, those structural carbohydrates that make the grass stand up. Otherwise it would be growing flat, right? So it's a necessary thing to get it to come out of the ground and stand up and grow and capture sunlight. And so somewhere there in the middle is the sweet spot. Like, if you get too far into phase 3, it's going to be too many carbohydrates, not enough protein, and those are the kind of cow pies that stack up and they're about this deep, right? You know, a cow that on the winter feed ground that lays there at night, and when she gets up, there's like a big pile behind her. That's that kind. Okay, so when is the optimal time to graze? I don't know, I shouldn't tell you it's a trick question. When's the optimal time to graze? There's no wrong answer. Yes, sir. Before it's gone to seed, when you can see 3 leaves on it. That's the perfect time to graze. When's the optimal time to graze?
When it's next door to where you're grazing now?
That's another good question. Anybody else want to throw out an answer? You're not wrong. You're not wrong. I'm just... All three. The optimal time to graze is today. Right? And you adapt. The perfect time to graze would be right there. But what's the challenge with the perfect time to graze? It's right there, right? And how do we manage for right there? So this is early spring. Notice I didn't take it all off last year. The cows are tired of eating hay all winter. They're chasing green grass all over. They're still, I'm still getting them to eat hay, so the manure's looking good. how many of you struggle with the month of April and May in your operations? Those are some tough months for a cow man, right? It's like, I am tired of buying hay, I'm tired of feeding hay, the cows are tired of eating hay, but yet grass just isn't really ready to turn them out on. But yet, man, sometimes the pocketbook just dictates you got to get them out there. Grass ready or not, here we come. And then all of a sudden, the next day you wake up and holy cow, where did all that grass come from? And in Nevada, that really can almost be 1 week to the next, where you go from no grass to the grass is headed out. And so, how do you graze in that perfect time? You just do the best you can. I think that's what you strive to graze it in that phase 2, because if we're really going to build soil health, that is the optimal time to build soil, because once it starts to go into reproductive phase, then it's putting, instead of shooting out the exudates into the soil to feed the soil, it's putting all the energy up into reproduction, because it says, I've got to set seed so that I can perpetuate things for days to come, right? Just another quick note on this, and this isn't, I wish I found that really lush green grass that you get when it looks like you could eat it. So that is maybe 2 days after this picture, but a lot of people that are finishing cattle, they're trying to finish it on high protein grass that is too immature, and it doesn't work to finish cattle. Why not? Because it actually puts cows into ketosis, whereby they burn intermuscular fat. That's your marbling. And so you might grow frame, but it's really hard to put finish on and when it's in that phase 1. So I don't know if any of you are grass finishers in here, but if that's, an issue that you're having is getting on that intermuscular fat and then the body fat, it's really tough to do in the spring unless you're supplementing with hay. And so for those of us that are trying to finish year round, you kind of have to reach into your bag of tricks and do some other things to be able to make it work on a year-round system. Cow-calf is a lot more forgiving. Finishers are great because they make you realize if there's something off in your grazing, it's going to show up quicker. The cow-calf deal, you can make it work, because we've been making it work for not perfectly for a long time, and we've been getting by. Okay, so any questions on that? The way that you tell this super simple test, I was going to bring one of these with me today, but I didn't. You can say thanks. Really easy way to tell is when things are balanced. See that little pond right there? Super good indicator. That's not going to be there if your grass is too immature or if it's too lignified, if it's too late, too mature. Okay? So always look at your cow pies. You can tell a lot of things about cow health. You can tell a lot of things about soil health by looking at manure. If those of you who don't have cows, I don't know what to tell you. Man, you're just not ever going to get there. No, really. You will. You will. This is just one indicator that ranchers we have that we can use, and sometimes we don't even look what we step in, right? It's like, what is that telling us? So that was fresh, obviously, barely out of the cow's back end. Come back in 3 days and see how much of that is left, and that's going to tell you how many creepy crawly things you have in the soil. If you're using Ivomec, things like that, you're gonna have a harder time building soil, if you're using some kind of a wormer. So, and generally, you don't need it if you're moving often. Worms and parasites and most disease are just a mismanagement problem. Okay? All right, so this is, I heard 2 years ago, 2020, had some neighbors, so we custom grazed, so we just kind of look for who has a need, who fits our protocol. One of our protocol is don't worm, because we don't want them, or at least not within the last 6 months. Don't put any wormer in them because we want that good, healthy manure. Single strand poly wire, this is a little bit more of the principle the practice than the principle. Train them to it. Put them on against a good hot fence to start with, and then they won't breach that once they learn that, hey, that's going to be hot. We run them in a tight mob. We move them across our irrigated fields. We try to move once a day. Twice a day would be better. 4 times a day would be best. But again, what's the optimal time? As much as is practical. Water dictates how you can do that. Again, in the Savory class, we'll come up with a grazing plan using your infrastructure, not breaking the bank of putting in a bunch of fences or a bunch of water that first year. Let you get your feet wet, let you start building with what you have. And then when profit allows, then you can add in infrastructure, right? And it's we kind of have the rule of thumb that it's got to pay for itself, at least amortized payments in that year that you build that infrastructure, right? A lot of people come home from a school and they think, well, I got to have all these fences, I've got to have these water systems, they build them, and then they spend decades cussing them because they're built, and they're built in the wrong place because they don't know enough. So just start temporary. Drag water lines out across the ground if you need to. So yeah, it's just super simple, low. Let me see, where are we at? Okay, yeah, maybe that's the good one to look at. So if you look at this one, the law of the thirds, does this make sense? So if you look, this is the field that we've come out of. This is where they're in. That's where they're going to go next. We didn't graze it down to the dirt, right? That's not good for the cow. It's not good for the soil. And so if we look at the law of the thirds, and I thought I was super smart and came up with this until somebody else quoted it in a different context. But a third is for the cow, for the critter that's grazing it. A third is for the little critters, and then we leave a third standing as the solar panel, right? Because we're going to get regrowth a lot faster. Now granted, in this picture, again, that was not the perfect time to graze it because it had already gone to seed. And so my regrowth is going to be a lot slower because it's got to pull from reserves to be able to regrow. Whereas if it was in that reproductive phase, that phase 2, regrowth would be better. But again, you do the best you can. You're putting a lot of carbon down on the soil surface when you're grazing lignified grass. And so you're going to be feeding the fungus, which is something that we really lack in our state. We'll see if this plays. Maybe. Okay, Marguerite, how do you play a video? It might not have downloaded onto Tony's thumb drive because it was kind of a big file, so I should have had my own thumb drive. Okay, it's okay. One third for the microbes or the little critters, and 1/3 solar panel. Yep, okay, it's okay. If we just get back to where we were, we'll be all right. Thanks for trying. This was just a short video, a 2-minute long video of moving that herd. There was about 300 head in that herd, and it took more than 2 minutes because I had to build the fence, but it took 2 minutes for them to get from one side of the fence to the other side of the fence, and I wasn't chasing them. You know, they're like teenagers looking for the buffet. They're gonna get to the front of the line and they're gonna get through, and their heads go down and they start grazing again. So just imagine 300 head of red Angus heifers moving through an electric fence. We could all simulate that right now if you want, but I think you guys have got it, right? Okay, I think we did that earlier when we went to lunch. Okay, so a good question is, how do we do this on large-scale range ground? The answer is, do the best you can. Okay, remember the principles, remember the insights, and up here, it's, you know, I mean, we're talking from the valley bottom, we're at 6,500 feet. Up here at the ridge top, we're about 8,500 feet. It's pretty impractical to build fence and move them every day. So we use herding, we use salt and mineral placement. And I'll just tell you, when it comes to timing, the biggest thing that I see in a situation like this is when you get off, stay off for that rest of that season. That's probably the biggest challenge we have because there's not a back fence, is keeping the cattle off of what is already grazed. Because again, as our gentleman said over here, overgrazing is a function of coming back too quickly to that plant, right? And so these perennial grasses, these bunch grasses, they're wonderful, they're great, and we want to take care of them. But the cows, you know, they're gonna graze it, and then if we get a little rainstorm or it greens back up, they know what's better for them, right? They're gonna go back to that green lush grass versus pushing on to, you know, the more lignified grass. So we do the best that we can. The other thing when it comes to this is your season of use is a big deal to me. So don't use the same field at the same time every year. Just change it up. So in our upland pastures, like we talked about the irrigated generally will graze 3 times in the growing season, and then we'll usually come back again in the dormant season or feed hay on it, you know, after it's gotten a good freeze down. Up here, this is just a once over, 1 time per year, and ideally on our fenced pastures, we will alternate. So I'll use 1 in the spring, and then it won't see a cow again until that next fall, and occasionally, so it'll have more than a year's rest in an ideal situation, right? And then occasionally we'll throw in a full year rest. And so why do we do that? It seems like it's wasteful, right? I'm a custom grazer. My income is directly impacted by the number of cows that I can graze. And so why do we do that? If you're always leaving grass, you will never run out of grass. So last year was a record drought for us. We did have to run less cattle, but we ended up at the end of the year, we had more feed than we thought. We destocked on our irrigated fields. Some of the cows off the mountain went home with the calves in August, end of August, I guess, and then we brought in dry cows, more dry cows. So actually our income was a lot more than what we had projected at the beginning of the season. So, and I think that's just a function of, you know, trying to do the best you can over the last 18 years since we learned about holistic management and intensive grazing. So, yeah, so we've got water in most of these draws. This time of year, this one would probably be dry, so they'd have to come over on this side. Our riparian areas, you know, they do like to lounge around them and things, and so, you know, again, we do the best that we can to try to encourage them, putting salt up high and doing things like that to pull off the riparian areas. I really haven't done much as far as electric fence up here, although we did build a couple cross fences last year, just some drift fences to keep cattle, again, off of what we wanted them to get off of. Okay, so any questions up to this point? So as you can see, adaptability is key here, right? This is, would this be a brittle or non-brittle environment up here? Brittle environment. The meadows would be a non-brittle environment or less brittle environment, okay? So we change and we adapt based on where we are. Yes, sir? Yeah, so are you talking about like planted annuals, cover crops, or are you talking about cheatgrass? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, super good question. Throughout the West, we're in a vicious cycle, and William and I talked a lot about this on the way down, and this is the multi-million-dollar question. How do you break out of this cheatgrass, fire, cheatgrass, fire cycle? It's perpetually keeping these landscapes in a low succession state. Low succession means that when a natural event comes through, like a fire, a flood, or a man-made event like severe grazing, tillage, succession is going to start out with whatever can grow there. Nature just wants to put a Band-Aid on the soil and wants to heal it, and that's going to be annuals and it's going to be weeds. And so those are just indicator species of like, okay, we can look at this landscape and we can say, okay, this is in a low succession state. What we want to do is, as managers, we want to accelerate that, right? Because I manage, you don't want it to be in that annual state. Okay. So do you want it to be in perennials or annuals? In perennials, okay? And again, what is your context, right? If we're grazing annual cover crops and that's super profitable for us and we're finishing cattle on them every year, maybe we want to maintain that state. But I can imagine even in that state, we're going to want to have more fungal dominance. Early succession is bacterial dominant. Later succession is, you know, more that balance that Jill talked about, right? The 1-to-1 fungal ratio. So late succession is woody species, more fungal dominant. So for most of us, because we're grass farmers and we're livestock producers and we don't graze or we don't grow old growth forests for profit, we want to manage somewhere there in the middle, right? We want some bacteria, we want some fungi. And if the fungi is enough in that state, this is a long answer to a short question, but I want to emphasize, you know, that the weeds and the annuals aren't the issue. They're not. They're just the symptom of an underlying issue. Does that make sense? Okay. And so if we just focus on what we see above ground, and we're like, we just got to graze that cheatgrass off. We got to graze that cheatgrass off. We got to graze it. What are we doing to those little perennial plants that are trying to grow in the springtime? If we're grazing the cheatgrass, do you think they're going to be grazing the bunch grass also? Is the bunch grass out there? That seed is latent. It's laying in the ground. It's probably there. It's waiting for the right time to express itself. And so to just be able to say, yes, absolutely, graze it every year in June, right as soon as that, you know, before that cheatgrass heads out. That one day you need 10,000 cows, and let's just get them out there for that one day and then get them, send them home. Because that's really what it's going to take to be able to like manage the acreage on one ranch, right? I'm not talking about a west, but 10,000 cows for 2 days to be able to manage the cheatgrass, and then what do you do with them? So you do the best that you can, and you look at like what's beneath the surface. Hopefully that answered that question that, you know, what is the issue? Because weeds really aren't the issue. It drives my neighbors nuts. We have a lot of weeds. But those weed seeds are going to outlive me and you and my kids. And so if I'm always focused on the weeds, I'm going to miss the bigger issue of how do I help nature to progress quicker. And we can do that. We can do in days what nature would take decades to do as managers. That's a bold statement. William will back me up in the back of the room, though. We talked about this on the way down. He said 10 minutes. I'm not that bold, but I'm going to say days. I'm going to say we can do in days what nature would take decades. We can do in weeks and months and years what it would take centuries to do. And I believe that's not only our ability, but that's also our responsibility to do that. And how do we do that? By understanding the principles, by applying, by getting feedback, adjusting, making adjustments. You know, there's not a single answer. So again, what it looks like up here on these high mountain ranges is going to be different than what it looks like down in the meadows. Last year we bale grazed. That's the first time we've ever done that. We harvested hay because hay was expensive. I'm not an extractive farmer. I don't like to ship nutrients off, even though I probably could have sold the hay at a profit. We penciled everything out. We put the hay up, left it in the field, left the round bales untied. And then we just basically strip grazed, and we would use not a back fence, because things were dormant, so I don't care if they go back, as long as they don't start trailing and leave trails in the field, but they would go back to water. And we would give them 2 days ration. We would just build a new fence out in front of them 2 days, and then they'd go back to water, and then every 2 days we'd roll that fence and move them. That's adaptive. Okay. Yeah, they were loose. If I do it again, I'll probably put it in sisal twine, so it holds the bale together, and so it cures a little bit better. We put this hay up high moisture, and we inoculated it so it actually fermented. So we were doing a lot of things and a lot of feedback, and I wouldn't do the same thing twice. So I would put it up in a bale. I don't know if I'll put up grass hay, because you can't keep the moisture in. It wicks it out too much, and it doesn't ferment good. How much do you waste? None of it. I mean, it's hard to say that, right, when hay is $300 a ton, and you see when you move those cows, you see that big ring of hay on the ground, but what's that doing for the soil biology? It's not efficient, but I think it can be a highly effective system to be able to build soil. And that's a little facetious. I mean, yeah, you're probably 20% that's gonna get trampled on, at least. And again, does it fit your context? I mean, it didn't cost me $300 to put up this hay. If I was buying 300-ton alfalfa, I don't think I would do it that way. You know, I would flake it off and they would clean it up. So, yep. Anybody seen one of these? This is super fun. Not really. A grazing chart. Man, I don't know, if you're a numbers guy and you want to plug this into Excel, you can have fun with it. This is basically, this helps to manage your time, right? Remember, time is one of those components, and it helps you to track over time where you've grazed, how long you've grazed, and so that you're not going back and you're not tempted to go back to that same field every year at the same time of year because you've got records. It doesn't have to be this sophisticated, but I would encourage you, and if you come to the class, we're going to encourage you to do this at first until you learn it. Maybe you'll fall in love with it, maybe you'll see the real value in it, and maybe you'll stick with it. Maybe you'll just go back to your red book or your notebook. What I do is kind of a hybrid, and I use Pasture Map. It's an app on your phone. You can take pictures and photo points out there. It's super user-friendly. You do have to pay a subscription for it, but I absolutely believe that that's, you know, that is something that I will do, and I can ask my guys to do that. I don't have a burning testimony that that's the right thing to do yet, and so I'm not doing it, but I do this. And that this is I think as effective, probably more effective because of the other things that you're able to do with it. The gals that made it up are great. You can overlay, if you've got your pastures mapped out on Google Earth, you can save that as a file, incorporate it into Pasture Map, and they're there, or you can draw them out on Pasture Map. If you're gonna start out, like in the land grazing class that we do with Savory, this is what we're going to be doing. And then we'll start putting your water points in there. We'll start putting key areas that maybe you want to target graze, or key areas that you want to avoid grazing at certain times. We manage for sage grouse. And so there's some, the neat thing is when we, as we're working with the sage grouse program, because we had all these pieces in place, the only management thing that we had to change was we have to flush the birds out of the hay if we cut hay. And most of the time we don't cut hay. For other people, it was a big change, and there was a lot of pushback and a lot of fight because, you know, because they don't want to do these steps, but I see the value in it. And so anyway, there's a little bit of incentive to be able to do some of these things. Okay, great. Okay, well, man, we flew through that. I think somewhere between my download and Tony's, we missed a couple slides. I'm trying to think of what I missed. I just added some slides to this morning and sent them over to Tony. And so, okay, so we just want to review, and this would be a good time to come back and ask questions. But, okay, so for you guys to be able to get out the door, to be able to go to your next class, what are the 4 key insights as I click back through here? Anybody know number 1? Oh, that's holism. Okay. Number 2, predator prey. Number 3, brittleness. Number 4, timing. Okay, the clock. Yep. All right. And I guess maybe I didn't miss any. There's lots of different names for types of grazing systems. I don't care what you call it. I can call it the Jared grazing system. And we want to give it a name, and maybe we want to say that one system's better than the other, or that this guy's system works better than the other. Probably if I had to pick a name, I would call it adaptive grazing. I think that's what Alan Williams calls it, because it has to be adaptive. You have to make it fit for your landscape, for your environment, for what you want to do, and also for your personality. And so as you're looking at the grazing chart, one of the first things that you do is you put in there the dates that you're going to be gone. Like you're planning your family vacation at the beginning of the year, and you're putting in those dates. And then you're putting down the dates that are off limits to graze. Maybe in one of the fields you're going to host a wedding or something, and you're going to put that down in there so we know that, the cows need to have grazed it, but the manure needs to be decomposed by then and dried out by then. And so, you're planning it, and it's instead of you working for the system, you have the system working for you. And so it actually creates, instead of a sense of like, oh man, I gotta go do this, it is a sense of, I know what I'm gonna do, and I have a plan to be able to go and do it, and if I'm not here, then I can train somebody and help somebody else because it's already in the plan. Okay, so a couple of things that I see with that plan. This last year, did any of you have a really cold spring this last year? And then it turned, and then what happened in June? We had 100 degrees the first week in June. Okay, so I don't know if these wild weather swings are going to get better, or if they're going to get worse, if they're going to stay the same. But we have to adapt, right? Because if you build your plan and you have these kind of these overlays that you're putting over it of when you want to be where and when you want to be where. But the thing that we ran into this spring is just things flat didn't grow. And that is a big issue, I think, here in the West. And sometimes you can have lots of soil moisture. 2011, even 2017 when we had those record years. Lots of soil moisture, but it was just cold. Just the ground stayed cold. Things just didn't really pop and didn't really grow like they were supposed to in May, according to my plan. And so what do you do in those instances? How do you adapt? And you'll have to figure out a plan that works for you. If you're out of money and you're out of hay, then when things are growing fast, here's the rule of thumb. When grass grows fast, you move fast, right? Is it ideal? Is it ideal to be grazing in that phase one? Probably not. Are you going to do tons of damage in the spring if you're grazing, if you're flash grazing? Not unless the ground is super wet, right? And you're doing high density, super high density on super wet ground. Again, that might be the right thing if you're trying to suppress a species and come back in with a cover crop. If you're trying to enhance perennial grasses and you got a lot of pugging and it's really wet, then you might set back succession. That might be the equivalent of a wildfire, and then you're going to get weeds and annuals. Maybe not. Maybe that's going to wake up the ground and you're going to see some species in there that you haven't seen, your clovers and things. And I've seen it on both sides, right? I've done that. I've stayed, too high of a stock density. Even though I was moving fast, the ground was too wet. My sod wasn't firm enough. And you could tell it didn't look as bad as a feedlot, but it looked pretty bad when you moved out of there. In some instances, it took years to come back. Sometimes it was just months later, and it was like, where was that I had that fence? You can't tell. And it happened last year. We were training an intern, and, put the fence in the wrong place, and it's like, holy cow, that looks terrible. Pugged up a big water crossing and, looked bad. So, adaptive is the key to be able to make a grazing system work. So why is it that cows are the preferred animal to be able to build soil? What is so unique about the cow that makes it a soil building machine, especially here in the West? Tramples? What'd you say, sir? The stomach. What about the stomach? Okay. Yep. So a horse is a monogastric, one stomach. Cows, sheep, goats, they are ruminants, meaning they have 4 stomachs. So they have to ruminate. It takes longer for the feed to go through, so they're partially digesting that. And the neat thing about the way that God made cows was that they could take this cushion off this chair and they could make it into beef, right? They can take this highly lignified grass, which, you know, is nothing but carbon, no protein left in it, and they're not actually feeding themselves. When they eat, they're feeding the microbes, right? It's just the same. It's very, very similar to the soil. And while there's not the fungal component in the ruminant, there are different microbes, amylolytic and cellulitic microbes, which help to break down different either starches or lignin. And so starches would be more of your grains, lignin would be more of your cellulitic, cellulose. Think of celery, right? We don't do very good on celery, right? Because we don't have a rumen. But cows would do great on it. If you want to grow a crop of celery, it's probably not the best crop for a cow, but they could digest it, they could get fat, they could raise calves, they could do it. So we look at these huge western landscapes, and we think, you know, what a waste that there's just these sparsely planted bunch grasses out here. Who knows what it looked like a century ago? I would like to go back and see, you know, how quickly are we degrading it? Are we degrading it? Probably. How quickly? Yep. And what did that? What sheep? So it's all the doggone sheep herders' fault. Man, they ruined it. It's a what? It's a management issue. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So my family's sheep men. I mean, don't shoot me here. We don't have them anymore, but sheep can be destructive. They can say they can be more destructive than cows. I don't agree. I mean, up until on the acreage that we leased behind our house, up until it changed management 2 years ago, we ran a band of sheep in front of the cows to mitigate larkspur. And sheep are really easy on riparian areas, and they browse really well, and they prefer not to graze if there's good browse. But mismanagement, yeah, absolutely, you're going to set things back with sheep, with horses, with cows, with camels, with gophers. I don't know anybody that manage graze. Do you? Do you? I mean, you could solve third world hunger with some of these Yeah, I'm with you. Is that the problem or is that a symptom? I don't know. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Maybe that's like the prussic acid and it kills cows, it kills goats. Yeah. Well, I think you've got the answer. And I think it'll come to you because if somebody prescribes before they know, you know, that's the thing. I've invested a lot of my education. And I've had people come out, and ultimately I've got to come up with the answers for my place. They'll give me principles, but the practices, and I appreciate that because I managed an organic farm that was just infested with ground squirrels, and our hands were tied there too. You know, we couldn't do anything but shoot them, and so, but it's to look at the bigger picture, you know, the first key concept of holism and what is the problem. Are the gophers the problem, or you know, are they a symptom of not necessarily, and it's not always our management. we inherit it, either what we created or what our parents created or what the previous land manager created. And so we just have to do the best that we can today. Orson, do you comment, question? Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, and and we're starting to see it come back, the Great Basin wild rye. It's a great bunch grass, good at holding soil, great root structure. Again, it matures really early. You know, I wouldn't like a monoculture of it, but a little bit goes a long ways. Provides good feed into the winter. Pretty drought tolerant. Other questions, comments? Yes, sir. Uh-huh. That's a good question. And so back to this picture, I want to close the loop in my system as much as possible. Like if I am going to put up hay, ideally I'll feed it back. If we are going to feed hay for somebody else, they're going to bring it in and feed it where I want them to feed it. But we've got to pay the bills, right? And that's, so this last year when we decided to hay our fields, the same field twice in a row, it was an economic decision. I just looked at hay's going to be $300 a ton or whatever it was back then, and I'm like, I know my opportunity cost, what I can generate is $110 a ton if I graze it. And so it doesn't make sense to get $110 a ton and buy hay at $200 a ton. I have greater benefit ecologically if I graze it, I believe, because I can manage for it to be in that stage 2, phase 2 growth stage. And so I can sequester more carbon, I can build more soil grazing it. But you have to weigh that with the economics of it as well. And so, you know, one answer, and that's for me, the answer for you is probably different, you know. Is that? Oh, just leaving it there. Yeah. So I guess with that, if you've got a cow that can cycle some of it and you can trample it, I'll always go with the cow, but I'm a cow man, right? And so I have that tool that I can use and I'm deriving value from that cow. So if I'm gonna roller crimp or if I'm gonna graze, it'll always, I shouldn't say always, what's the context, right? I will prefer to graze. And so that's kind of, again, what fits with your resource base. Okay. I appreciate you guys coming. This is, oh, there we go. I was just trying to get back to the last slide here, maybe. Nope, maybe it's the first one. Anyway, you guys have got my contact information, I think, jaredesorensen.com to be able to sign up for classes. We also do on-farm consulting and creating business and holistic management plans for operations. So starting from you as an individual, right? That's where I believe it has to start. What your purpose is, incorporating that into the purpose of the business, looking at the resource base, the land, the finances, the people, and helping you as a third party looking over your shoulder and maybe an optimistic or objective set of eyes on your operation and saying, okay, you know, have you thought about this? Ultimately, you've got to own the plan though. You know, It's a done with you, not done for you, because that will guarantee success. If I say, here's the plan, just go do it. Yep, that's like the BLM. I'm not going to do that, but I will work with you and would love to be able to work with you with the desire to drive profit, to be able to create time for you and your family, and to be able to create enjoyment and fulfillment in what you do, so that the next generation looks at it and says, yeah, if there's an opportunity, absolutely we'll come back. Okay, thanks you guys. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, he did.
Okay.